Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics to help bridge the gap that exists between what we know and what we do in early childhood education. We're starting conversations with academics, authors, decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education while at the same time protecting and respecting the childhood experience. You may know Heather Bernt-Santy as that early childhood nerd. Host of the podcast with the same name, Heather has been working with children, their families, and their caregivers for over 30 years. And as she says, she's loved very nearly almost every minute. She released her first book a few months ago titled Using Schema Play Theory to advocate for free play in early childhood. And I'm so excited to finally have the book in my hands and to have Heather on today's podcast. You can find this episode's show notes, which are always full of links, tidbits, and resources at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 83. Before we jump in, I want to let you know that Powerful Play Foundations is open and has some special bonuses that end on February 9th. Powerful Play Foundations is an online professional development resource that will help you better understand, practice, and advocate for powerful, intentional play in your learning environment. One of my main intentions was to create a quality professional development resource that would be valuable and accessible for even small programs and teams. Feedback has been spectacular, with groups saying that it's not only instilled more confidence and cohesion in their team, but it's transforming the way they approach early childhood education altogether. Learn more and get your team started at notjustcute.com/powerful play. If you're curious about what Schema Play is and how it helps us better understand and advocate for play-based education, this episode is for you. Let's jump in. All right, Heather, I am really, really excited to talk to you about your book today.
Oh, yay. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for coming. Before we jump into that, I always like to start by asking people about their own professional journey and, what you do, first of all, and how you got to do that, because I talk to a lot of early childhood professionals and everybody's growing and finding ways to take their passion and serve children and families, but there are a lot of different ways that can look. And so I love hearing people's stories, and I would love to hear yours.
Yeah. So right now I'm a college professor at a community college in Indiana, teaching early childhood education, and host that early childhood nerd podcast, and just had my first book published. So that's what I do now. But I started when I was 19 working in a childcare center, not knowing that early childhood or child development was something you could even study, just knowing that someone I knew said that they were looking for employees, and I had kind of an instinct to work with children, and had done all the things we did, right? Babysitting as a teenager. And
Right.
so I started working with children in a childcare center in Kearney, Nebraska. And a couple years in, discovered a book at a teacher store, because this was the 1990s, so we weren't on the internet. I had to go find teacher stores. And it was called More Things to Do with Toddlers and Twos by Karen Miller, probably 1991 or two. And that's where I learned, like, oh, wait, cognitive development, social emotional development, like, what is all this?
Right.
And once I got that, I just kept trying to challenge myself. But I spent a lot of time in childcare center classrooms, and then I was a director, and I tried family childcare for like a year, but I was not the person who could do that and just be isolated and work those long hours. Couldn't do that. But it is, I think it is hard to find in childcare specifically that career lattice, that what and I miss being with the children every day. But when I got the opportunity, the college where I am teaching now, and I'm also the program chair for early childhood here, is the college that I got my associate's degree from when I came back to college in my 40s. So it feels like a real full circle moment.
Right.
Uh,
All of it does, the coming back to the
yes,
college and the book that
the
set you
book
on your
for
path, and now
sure.
the book that you're
Yeah.
putting in other people's hands. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. It's really wild.
And I've always loved your name, that early childhood nerd, because I'm like, oh, those are my people. Anybody who wants to
Yes.
nerd out about early childhood, right?
Yeah.
And get really deep about those things that people assume are very simple.
As soon as I started a Facebook page called That Early Childhood Nerd before the podcast existed. Um, Mostly just because I wanted to connect with people about these ideas and books, and we weren't even, podcasts were pretty new in my world at that point. And as soon as I started that page, I got so many messages from people that were like, I'm a nerd too.
all, all the nerds unite, right?
Yeah, it was so great. Yeah. So I say I'm not the early childhood nerd, but I am that one.
You're that one. I love that. And I'm so excited to be holding in your hand, or in my hands, your very first book.
Yes.
It's called Using Schema Play Theory to Advocate for Free Play in Early Childhood. And that's so exciting. Like I said, that full
Yeah.
circle moment of
Yeah.
taking, that aha moment you had holding your first early childhood book, and now all the people, your own students, but all throughout the world, people
Yeah.
holding this book and
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, this
What
is
if
my
this is
moment."
that book for somebody? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I love that. I'm curious if you could tell a little bit about the how that writing process was for you. We both put out
Mhm.
books close together, and I was mentioning to you earlier, somebody asked me, was that process like this long, methodical, slow process, or was it this quick, like frantic, deep dive process? And I was like, yeah, it was both. It
Yes, it
was
was
all the
both.
things.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious for you what your pathway looked like.
Yeah. Well, I was just talking about this the other day because it came out in November. Um, and but it was in process for 2 or 3 years, probably 3 years. And I felt like, oh, that's so long. And I felt sort of like ashamed it took me so long. But the people that I talk to who have written books are like, no, I mean, because of your processing and
Hmm.
that long before you get into the actual writing. So the actual, like, putting the words on the page uh was, mm, less than a year. But
Hmm.
the process of really thinking about it and figuring out what the format should be once I had the idea, and researching all the stuff that I wanted to learn more about, it was really a pretty amazing professional development experience for myself too. There was stuff I was writing that I already knew, but there was a lot I still had to find out
Hmm.
to get it on the page. So I also learned a lot myself going through it. But then, yeah, the deadline comes, and the last 2 months were a burst of
Uh-huh.
frantic. I've got to get this done. Um, uh, which I'm very deadline and panic driven. So
Same, same.
so as long as there was no looming deadline, I felt like it was kind of a leisurely stroll. And then the deadline was approaching, and then it became frantic.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I relate to that feeling of, oh, this took so long. I could have done this 5 years ago. And then I think the book I would have written 5 years ago would have been completely different.
Absolutely.
And that it's the process, like you said, all the research and the professional development, just the personal inquiry process.
Yeah.
But it's also that time of letting it simmer. And I
Mhm.
think having that question made me realize, well, I wrote the book at this time in my calendar, but I've been writing it for years,
Yeah.
which I'm sure is the same for you. You've
Yeah.
really been writing it for years. And then you've,
Yeah.
like you said, put it down on paper
Yeah.
over the course of a few months. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. And it's clear that it's that kind of a book that wasn't just written on a whim, but was deeply thought about, deeply researched. So let's jump in with Schema Play, since you're
Yeah.
the Schema Play expert now. So
Oh my God.
I love that look on your face. Um, so how do you explain to people what Schema Play is?
Mhm.
What does it look like? How do we know it when we see it?
Yeah. I mean, the short, quick definition is that when we're talking about schema play specifically, there are repeated patterns that we see in children's play. It's like those kind of repeated verbs that we see children
Hmm.
doing while they're following their own ideas. So, um, it transforming and trajectory, which is, I guess, not a verb, so I've ruined my thesis already, but
It still fits.
trajectorying,
It's active.
transporting, and enclosing and enveloping. It's stuff we see children doing over and over when we stop and really pay attention to what they're doing. And I mean, I don't know how deep it comes from. The work of, I mean, obviously Piaget talked about schema, right? That was one of his big things, where we're constructing our own knowledge, and as we move through the world and interact with real world things, we start to develop schema concepts, and then we continue interacting, and we get information that maybe fits that schema or maybe challenges that schema, and then we have to kind of rearrange it all and figure out what fits and what doesn't. So for children, or for the schema play, Chris Athey came in to build on Piaget's work about schema, doing some work in England in like 1973 to 78. I forget. I have to put the 19 at the beginning of years.
Right.
I can't just say 73 to 78. Where she spent a couple of years just observing children like 2 to 5 years old, with the hope and the goal that by watching them play and interact, they would be able to learn about their thinking. And by learning about their thinking, then they could provide more supportive, kinds of environments and experiences for them. So from that came these ideas of transforming and trajectory and connecting and disconnecting that I write about in the book.
I love that. And I find it interesting because we often talk about themes in early childhood, right? We have a bug theme, we have a this theme, but their play already has all of these themes,
right?
And that's what you're looking for. So for something like the trajectory schema, what are some different ways that can look? Because that's part of the point, is it's not trajectory schema always looks like this one thing. It's this theme that overarches lots of types of play. So what would trajectory play? And that's one of the things I love in your book. You have a lot of vignettes and stories, and so that we can really, you've illustrated it with your words. So with trajectory, what are some of the ways that can look?
Yeah, I just want to throw this in first, that those stories are real. Sometimes I read books and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that
never happened.
Really happened. I've never known that 5-year-old.
Right.
But when the publisher asked me to do pseudonyms, even though I had parent signed, consent things, I texted all the parents and said, ask your child what they want their name to be in my book. And so all the names that are in here are names those children chose.
I love that. And nobody chose the name Sparkle.
Nobody chose Sparkle. No. No, there were some, we had to do some negotiating with a couple of children. But anyway, I love that. So trajectory is really an exploration of how things move through space. So it could be 2 children racing with each other. It could be a child jumping off the bottom of the slide or the swing. It could be a child, pushing a car or rolling a car down a slide or a ramp or something like that. Sometimes it's less fun stuff like throwing, maybe throwing something we don't want them to throw. And sometimes it's knocking down a block tower that you've been building. So, any really play that we see where they seem to really be curious about space and moving through that space could fall into a trajectory schema.
And I love that the way you describe it is almost like it's categorization is the categories of study, right? That this is like you said, they're studying how things move through space, and they're being curious and exploring this concept that maybe they can't verbalize and label it, but if we get curious with them, we can start to see the theme of what that play looks like.
And I say this with my students a lot. I don't know that. So in the story, I think it's Jaden maybe is the name, or in the book, there's a story of Jaden wanting to use a pool noodle to roll a car down a slide and land it on this little trampoline that he's pulled up to it. And I don't know that he's probably consciously thinking, oh, I am learning so much about how things move through space.
Right.
This is really great trajectory data.
Exactly. I put it in my notebook.
Yeah. But it is all data to the child's developing brain, whether they have the words in their brains themselves. It's still all information about the world around them. And yeah, then we can start to talk about, maybe we start describing to them, or we've got a photo and we're talking to them about it later, or we're just sort of narrating what we see them doing. We can layer in some of that conscious labeling and naming of what's happening, but it's still valuable even if I'm not doing that.
Right. And it helps us to be better observers and facilitators of that play so that we know, let's bring these things out, or let's not bring things out that we know they're going to be chucking across the room for now. Let's put those outside. Right. And so it helps us. I just love the curious approach that you bring for educators to be curious and to be also gathering that data to see, how do I better support this? How do I get curious with them? What else might they be wondering, and how can I spark that or support that as they're exploring these ideas? So with that, I know in child development, I think we have this tendency to want to make everything linear and put it on a checklist and that sort of thing. And so I wondered if you could talk about how schema play fits into that mindset, or doesn't fit into that mindset. Do we need to make sure they're checking off all of the schema? Are they going to be in one schema and only that schema? What does it actually look like in a developmental pattern?
Yeah, it's definitely not linear, right? It's not Erickson's 8 stages of man
right?
that we move through and we don't really maybe come back to. It's dynamic, right? Schema play is, it's not something that children move through all 8 or 10 schemas, depending on what words you're using, move through each, and then they're done and they've achieved schema totality.
Right.
And some children might have, like, this is my one schema that I explore the world through. George in the book, he was an encloser and an enveloper, and that's how we saw him interacting in every space we saw him in. But not every child has like their schema. Sometimes it's just looking at all of the children and noticing all the different play schemas that are popping up. So it's not something that we're necessarily going to say, well, 9 to 9:15 is trajectory time.
Right.
And then at 9:15, we have to switch to rotation and circularity. But that's our tendency, right? We want a linear developmental scale so we can really look for deficit, right? Look to see what they're not doing yet. And it's not something that we have to put on a lesson plan. But it is stuff that we can, like, there's ways we can use it in that kind of teachery way. I've thought about developing checklists to look around your space and say, how many things do I have in here that would invite transporting or transforming or positioning and ordering? What's here that is inviting that, and which ones of them maybe I don't have as many opportunities for them. So it can still be used as a tool for, planning or supporting children or facilitating their development, but it's not a prescriptive kind of an idea, if that makes sense.
And like you said, you may have George who's doing the enclosing and enveloping everywhere all day. And then, someone else who's playing with 5 different schemas in 1 to 5 different areas of the room that they might bounce around to all those different things.
And
it also
George was
go ahead.
was 4 and 5 when I was working with him, and his mom really clicked with this idea of enclosing and enveloping schema, and it made so much of the weird stuff he does sort of make sense to her. And I think he's probably 10 now, and every now and again she'll still send me like a photo of something that maybe fits or if I talk about him at a conference or something, I'll let her know. And she said one time she was like, is he still the enclosure king? Like, yeah, he is.
Nobody tops it. He's still well, it also seems like the schema theory fits with so many other theories, so many other educational philosophies. And like you said, it obviously connects with Piaget, but with other developmental viewpoints and other educational philosophies that schools might hold. It's not like only this school uses schema and that school doesn't. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how it can undergird and support a lot of different types of programs and philosophies?
Yeah, I mean, the one that automatically comes to mind besides Piaget, obviously, is even Erik Erikson, his idea of so maybe is it 3, 4, 5-year-olds are in that initiative versus guilt kind of work that they have to do. And to me, I've always read that or thought about that as, in that stage, children are kind of trying to figure out, are my ideas good and okay and valuable, or should I feel bad about having these ideas of my own? And I think that clicks for me so nicely with schema, because so much of what is valuable about schema play is we can see that stuff that maybe looks like nothing, or is maybe inconvenient or hard to understand, or not the way we would do it, that sometimes we shut down or treat as misbehavior. And this gives us an opportunity to say, I have a new way now to think about what I see this child doing. And so I'm going to respond in a different way. And that's going to send more of a initiative kind of reinforcement than that guilt kind of reinforcement. I think about even children walking down the hallway to get from their classroom to the playground, and one of them wants to run his hand along the wall, and that slows us down, and it doesn't make sense to me. Let's just get to the playground. We might treat that as misbehavior, or send that hands at your side kind of firmness, which with no bad intention from that grown up, but still can sort of register as, oh yeah, my ideas are bad. It's not safe here to try my ideas. But if I see that as an exploration, or, a curiosity, he wants to know how the wall feels. Maybe it just is comforting for him to have his hand along the wall as we walk. Then we respond differently. And I think schema play understanding opens up a lot of that. How do I respond to a child's ideas, and what message does that response send?
I love that. And it helps us reframe that, like you said, rather than just, how do I shut it down, to, okay, maybe in whatever instance is not appropriate, how can I still feed that curiosity? How can I still, like you said, validate that curiosity and question, and instead of giving that message that it's wrong, bad, but that core question is still right. Let's find a right way to play with that idea.
Yeah, I think, we're really good at talking about redirecting to switch. This isn't necessarily another theorist or philosophy, but just in terms of like behavior management ideas, it really can shift us or help support us when we're thinking about, okay, I know I'm supposed to redirect. I don't want them throwing this block, so I'm going to redirect them to the water table, or try to get them interested in something else. But if we look at that instead and say, maybe throwing the block was a trajectory question. So how else could we play with trajectory that's not a giant wooden block flying through the air? Or even, I don't want them throwing blocks, so I give them these soft Nerf balls to throw. Well, that's not giving them the same experience. So is there a space where they can safely throw? If I put the basket in the corner and let them try, there's all kinds of different ways that we can then wonder about how to support in a way that's manageable for the group we're in, and safe for the group we're in, and still meets that child's drive to understand the world. I think schema play can be really helpful for that too.
Yeah. I think in a similar way, I've heard you talk about schema play theory helping you to see play. Well, you've mentioned it today, that otherwise seems random or chaotic. And I know you and I both have heard people saying, I'm experiencing, or I'm having children come into my program that don't know how to play. Keep hearing that phrase, don't know how to play. And some of it has to do with social skills and the support and experience and exposure they've had to play. But you made me see a different way in recognizing that maybe it's that they're playing with a schema and we just see it as chaos. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you can decipher the difference between not knowing how to play, quote unquote, versus I, as the adult, not knowing how to see the play.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is that as adults, we're product oriented unless we really get intentional about thinking about process, and children the age that this is, kind of that I'm writing about here, are just in the process. And so if my idea of play is they are pretending something that looks familiar to me, or they are creating using the Play-Doh in a way that looks familiar to me, or uh, yeah, they're able already to get along with each other and navigate. And if they can't do those things, or they don't use the rolling pins and the cookie cutters, they're just pulling Play-Doh into smaller pieces, smashing it together again and pulling it into smaller
Mm-hmm.
pieces, then there's a tendency, I think, to see that as not knowing how to play. But if we stop and say play is, you know, the child following their ideas, and their ideas don't look like our ideas sometimes, then that is a kind of an offering for us to say, okay, um, play just looks different to them than it does to me, or
Mm-hmm.
these things just seemed weird and random. But now that I know they have a name and we can put the word theory on it, then maybe what they're doing is okay. So I think that's a big piece of it. I mean, I definitely think that there are children who have been so scripted, and um, that having the freedom to choose is sometimes sort of um, where we see, oh, they don't know how to do it because they're waiting for
Mm-hmm.
someone to tell them
It's kind of paralyzing.
how to do it. Yeah. But mostly I just think a lot of times when I hear people say they don't know how to play, it's either they don't have the social skills yet, which why would they?
Right.
They're very new to earth, or we're just very product oriented, and we have already a product of what that play should look like in our mind, when a lot of this transforming and trajectory and enclosing is a process that the child is working
Mhm.
through.
Ah, I love that viewpoint that it's seeing the process rather than looking for the checkbox outcome. It's
Yes.
looking for
Yeah.
that process and where does that what category helps me better understand the
Yeah.
process, the question that they're exploring. And I think that also connects to something we both talked about before as well, these elements of really effective learning and play, and meaningful is one of those
Mhm.
words that's used. And I love that you've called out that meaningful doesn't necessarily mean meaningful to you. It means meaningful to the child. That's what makes it effective and that's what makes it play.
Yeah.
And so I think that schemas give that as well, that ripping the Play-Doh into a bunch of little pieces doesn't look meaningful maybe to me as an
Right.
adult, but what about it is meaningful to them? And that helps us get a better insight
Yeah.
into
Yeah,
the
I was just talking with that with a group of students again about that, and that comes from the Lego Foundation has these 5 characteristics of playful learning based on neuroscience. And being meaningful is one of those characteristics. And yeah, the first time I tried to use that with a group of students, we were evaluating, lesson plan kinds of things. And I had chosen one that I thought they would all say that doesn't fit meaningful, and they did, and I was like, why is it meaningful? And they said, because it's a standard we're supposed to meet. And I was like, no, we're talking about what's meaningful to the child, and you only can really know that by watching them play and watching what they choose and watching how they use the stuff that they choose. So that's always an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the other one on the list that I often come across that is a light bulb for people is iterative, just because we don't use that word very often,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And that iterative is something that we do over and over, but not just redundantly. We're adding to. I tell people rather than a circle that goes over and over, it's like a spiral that's going up. Um, and that's a schema play is just such a perfect example of that iterative process that they do that
And
same play with that same question in so many different ways.
yeah, and you mentioned themes earlier. And that's what I think, that iterative, that repetition piece feels almost wrong, to let a child just repeat and redo, because we're sort of traditionally thinking, well, we have our theme, we do our planned things in the morning, and then we put that stuff away, and then there's a new theme, so we get new stuff out.
Mhm.
And or I hear, well, what about a child who's just stuck in their play? And if someone asks me
Mm.
that, I really need to know a lot more about what specifically is happening, because it could just be this iteration, this schema repetition that their brain really needs, and not being stuck in place. Sometimes children do need a little bit of nudge to move along to something different or an extension. But a lot of times they just need that space to keep doing the thing that they're so curious about
Right.
over and
You
over.
talk about being stuck makes me think about, if you look at Da Vinci or Edison and how fixated they were on one question and one exploration and
Yeah.
looking through that same lens, would we say that they were stuck, or would we say that they were just really diving deep into an exploration and they're following their curiosity? And we're so
Yeah,
glad they did, right?
for sure.
Well, part of what you do with this book is use schema play theory to advocate for play, and especially for more open, free play. And I love, one of the things that you talk about is that you have to understand the value of the person you're talking to. I mean, I think that's great writing, great communication, right? You have to understand your audience first, and then that helps you understand your message, rather than being mad people don't like your message the way you like it, right?
Right.
And so you talk about how you can look at people from different camps, different viewpoints, and use schema play as a way to explain the value of play to them. Can you expand a little bit or give a few examples on how you can talk about the same thing? We're advocating for play, but we talk about it a little bit differently to different audiences to help them understand that we value what they value, and we're going to find it with the same thing with play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sort of comes from, I mean, part of it comes from the fact that I was originally an English major the first time
Well,
I tried
that
college.
becomes very clear now.
um, but it also, when this all started as my master's thesis kind of
Mm,
project. And in doing the literature review for that, I just found, I think at the time I was calling them barriers to play. And it was stuff like practitioner preparation. Like we're just not talking enough about as in depth as we need to about play in our college classes, and cultural barriers like No Child Left Behind really shifted
mm,
everything. And if we go even further back, Russia beating us to space really shifted
right.
everything. And that contributes, or parental attitudes that, they just think that that's what they need to look for, is anything that looks like school must be correct. And that then sort of shifted into these crowds that I talk about in the book, the neuroscience crowd, the SEL crowd, parent crowd, playing teacher crowd, and the STEM crowd. And so then through the rest of the book, whenever I tell a schema story, I say, here's the message that might be valuable to someone who is most persuadable if you're talking about brain development. Or here's the piece of the story that might be valuable to someone who's really worried about science and math or literacy. And then, including a little bit there. And I just think that's, otherwise there's not going to be connection and communication. If I
Mm-hmm.
just say, I would love to live in a world where I could just say they're children and they deserve play, and it's
Mm-hmm.
their human right to have this experience, and here are the factors that are pushing play out, um, and just have everybody say, oh, you know what, you're right. Like that would
Uh-huh.
be a wonderful world, right? But the reality is, in any conversation that you're trying to connect or persuade or change anything, you have to figure out what matters to the person
Mm-hmm.
that is, sort of has the power to make that change. And so that ended up being like the main format, the main
Mm-hmm.
driver of the book was how do we figure out what matters to the people who could make a change and bring play more fully back into children's lives? And how do I tell the story in a way that is believable?
Yeah.
So
I think that's such a great perspective, but also I just love that you wrap it up into story. How do I tell the story? Not how do I prove that I'm right, but how do I tell the story that fits what they value? Because like you said, if we know at the core that it is just valuable because they're human and this is how they develop,
yeah,
then we'll be able to find how it matches their value as well, because it is, you and I believe, and I believe the research supports it, that it's just universally valuable, and so we should be able then to connect it to other values that people are holding as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are people who say we need to stop defending it and just say they need play and deserve play. But the reality is, um, not only that we need to make these cases to persuade the people who can make the change, but also the reality is learning values are still there. Like, even though
Mm-hmm.
children just deserve play, there are also all these meaningful things that come to children from play.
Mm-hmm.
Both things can be true, and we can we can use both things
I
to do good
agree.
things for children.
I agree. This is such a great resource. I'm so excited to dig into it more deeply. I had to skim it and preview it because it's new in my hands. But I just am so excited about what it has in it. And like I said before, it's just clearly going through it. You can tell it's just a high quality, well put together, well thought through book, and it's going to be such a great resource for people. My last question, I'm curious because I know you're the nerd. You're that nerd, right?
That nerd.
And I know as a fellow nerd, we're always nerding out about something, and there are always all these other questions and ideas. So my last question is, do you think there will be another book? And what kinds of things are popping around in your brain right now that are, maybe creating some of those glimmers of a next book, a future books, maybe?
I hope that there's a next book. Um, and I really miss being in the writing process, as even though it was stressful and sort of pressuring and all that stuff, I do really miss being in that space of,
Hmm.
having that specific thing to drive my research, and then writing about it and thinking about how it sits with the person who's reading it. But I don't know what it is yet. I'm sort of still
Yeah.
waiting, but I am thinking a lot about I'm thinking a lot about math right now. I'm not a
Mm,
math expert by any means, but that was part of the math pieces of this book were so interesting. And that was where I had to do a lot of research. But, I think about the impact that Stacey Benge's Whole Child Alphabet
mm,
book has had on the literacy conversation.
mhm,
Um, and the ways that adults I see working with young children are sort of afraid of math because of their own
mhm.
math anxiety.
Absolutely.
So that's something I'm thinking about, but also just the question, if they're quote unquote just playing all day, then how am I still a teacher? And what do I do with
Mm,
all my expertise and my good ideas and my,
yeah.
I love to plan and I love to create things, and how do we make it all fit? So those are kind of the two things noodling around.
I think both of those are fascinating, and from what I hear from teachers, both of those would be
Uh-huh.
really well received. Especially just recently, I've come across several working with directors of saying helping their teams, people on their teams, to see themselves as quote unquote real teachers
Yeah,
has been a big, it's been a big issue, and been a big aha for me of what types of things help them see themselves as a real teacher or to
yeah.
see this work as really teaching. Um, I think that'd be a really exciting thing for you to explore for
There was
sure.
part of me the other day, I was thinking about that and like putting together some articles I wanted to read. And there's part of me that was like, well, if it takes you 4 years to write another book, what if this problem is solved by the end of 4 years? I was like, well, then that would be amazing. And you move on.
I was just going to say, I have a few other problems you should work on writing about then. If that's the worry, is that they'll be solved, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, thank you for what you've put out with this book, but also with all of your work and for taking the time to talk today. It's been really,
fun.
really enjoyable.
Yeah, I had a good
Thanks so
time.
much, Heather.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 83. There, you'll find links to Heather's book and podcast, as well as other tidbits I know you'll love. You can also hit up the show notes for a link to Powerful Play Foundations, which could transform your team and your practice in this new year. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. You can also stay tuned for social media updates on Instagram by following me there at Amanda_NotJustCute. Thanks for listening today, and as always, thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.